Hello and welcome to this exclusive webinar. I'm Kritika Saxena. Intel and Jio Talks present Unlocking Tomorrow with 5G private networks and blockchain. We are here in these series to talk and understand about how 5G is going to change the game. Today specifically, we are going to talk about how blockchain and 5G private networks will help enterprises and individuals to be able to take their innovation and their business to the next level. Joining me is a very special panel, Ayush Bhatnagar, Senior Vice President from Jio Platforms Limited, Caroline Chan, VP of Data Platforms Group. She's also the GM of Network Business Incubator Division for Intel Corporation. Caroline and Ayush, thank you so much for joining me. Caroline, I'm just going to dive right in and ask you the first question. To your mind, how will 5G transform and change the way enterprises function and work? And of course, how will individuals benefit from it?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me, and hello from Dallas, Texas. So from Intel's perspective, and this is my personal conviction as well, that 5G is the business transformation, because consumer definitely will benefit, just like what we had in 3G and 4G. But the fundamental difference of 5G is about enterprise. So 5G is built on the get-go with the digital transformation in mind. So we build in low latency, we build in high reliability, and we build in security and capacity from the standard perspective, right? So instead of building a consumer technology and then you try to retrofit it for verticals, 5G is built with verticals in mind. So that is a major game changer that we want to take advantage of. So the amount of innovation that's using 5G is unsurpassed. And also from the network perspective, 5G is built as a software-defined. That means that it has packing a lot of compute and storage in the network rather than just simply get the best spectral efficiency. So things you can do like cloud gaming, all the industrial control systems, and allowing different retail transactions, AI, machine learning, analytics. All of that is really part of the parcels of 5G that enables. So for us at Intel, who really born in the cloud, that's our core business, and to extend the cloud through 5G to all the way to the edge of the network, and that's the name of the game. So in a nutshell, 5G is born and designed to benefit the business more than just the consumer side.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Ayush, let's take it from there. To your mind, how can companies like Jio and Intel come together to be able to change the way we work and the way we interact through 5G?
See, if you look at slightly a historical perspective of how communications have evolved over time. When we spoke about 3G and 4G, there was hardly any value proposition for the enterprise beyond both voice and data connectivity. But now when it comes to 5G, it is a very big opportunity for both carriers like Jio and also for enterprises to pave the way for their digital transformation. So 5G, like what Caroline also mentioned just a few moments back, 5G not only provides the bread and butter services of voice and data, but it also enables services such as industrial automation, edge security, data privacy, and sovereignty, which are now becoming increasingly important in the new world. So when we look at the Indian market in particular, Indian market has been very much left behind from the perspective of industrial automation to a large extent. So 5G provides a unique opportunity to catalyze the business transformation and digital transformation of businesses in India.
Okay, that's an interesting point. So the digital transformation is now going to be ushered in with the advent of 5G. But let me then turn this around. Caroline, again, back to you. What are the challenges in that case that individual companies face? If you were to realistically look at and look at use case examples, what are the challenges that people face today or that enterprises face today that are really going to be changed once 5G comes in?
Yeah, but right, I use it to describe it. like Intel itself is an enterprise. We run our own manufacturing plant. We run our own fab. So we have challenges in security, number one, right? I think Ayush mentioned that privacy, data sovereignty, and most importantly, if I would ask our CIO, what do you want to get out of it? It's about efficiency of operations, and ultimately that drives our revenue growth. So when we talk to our own CIO, we actually currently having engagement with our factories in Malaysia, for example, in Penang, and multi-assets becomes very important. We rely heavily either on outside in view from a cellular network perspective or a Wi-Fi. Ideally, you want to have our own networks. You call it a private network or slicer network, however you want to phrase it. But this network is tailored to enterprise like Intel. Does our needs includes edge capabilities, includes running data analytics, because not all data needs to go back to the cloud. Some data needs to be at a point on the edge where it has the most contextual information, like factory data, for example, or production data. Those things is very critical to the enterprise. It's very critical to us. It has a high level of security and implications. So in terms of enterprise functions that we conduct day-to-day basis, in terms of workload consolidation, increase security and privacy, those are all the requirements when we talk to our own CIO, our own IT, that's what they ask for.
Okay, so Ayush, let me get your answer into this. How do you believe that Jio and Intel and companies with a tech transformative background can actually change the way enterprises, operate, the kind of challenges they have? And, can you give us examples, like Karen mentioned, on where really, what are the hurdles that can be crossed once 5G actually does see the light of day?
See, first and foremost, the biggest hurdle is the hurdle of inertia, because enterprises need to realize the value of what 5G brings to the table. From a business owner's perspective, we need to somehow, create more awareness in the minds of the CIOs of the enterprises that this technology can actually bring down their OPEX and can also help them improve their operational efficiency. So that is the first non-technical challenge. Then comes the technical challenges, like which are centered around data security, because, for example, if you have an enterprise which is into the healthcare domain, then how to keep the patient records and the patient data secure at all times. The other biggest challenge would be to digitize the various supply chain points. If you look at the logistics industry, because today it is largely untouched from digitization. So the proliferation of IoT in supply chain and in logistics in a manner that it is connected to the 5G network of carriers and driven by a private and an enterprise 5G network, that is something which is a very alien concept to enterprises today. But I believe we are reaching a point where they are realizing the value that 5G can bring to the table, and they are more supportive and they are more accommodating in their stance as we move forward.
Okay, that's an interesting point that Ayush brought up. Caroline, taking from the point on 5G private networks, how does this change the game for startups, for SMEs, and for MSMEs? And how do companies where do companies really come in this gamut to be able to kind of make business easier?
Yeah, so you really would go back to the basics, right? Technology enables a transformation. I usually got a really good point. The inertia, the mindset is definitely something that we have to change. But fundamentally, let's just start with the technology side. We have we mentioned before, we have the ultra low latency, we have security building, we have the high capacity. And 3GPP release 16 really has the ability to allow multi-access. So they used to start bringing Wi-Fi into the same core infrastructure through the interworking function. Okay, for the first time, 3GPP allowing non-3GPP traffic come in. so this becomes a multi types of assets and application, because you can't go into CIO and say, well, flip, you now abandon everything you already have, the application. Remember what I used to talk about inertia? I mean, that's a major inertia. No one's gonna give up what they already have. What you want to do is introducing a new set of tools for them to leverage to improve their productivity. So we want to bring in the wireless piece, but we still need to maintain the SD-WAN, their Wi-Fi. But because the fact that 3GPP actually allows a non-3GPP traffic to come in the same core infrastructure, so the enterprise can actually get a multi-access private network from the operator, from Jio, and then they can now set their own data, devices, application using the network to the best leverage that they can do.
Taking from that point, you said that the big challenge is going to be inertia. Are you seeing CIOs, are you seeing the companies now gradually prepare themselves to be able to embrace 5G private networks and all the services that come along with it?
Yes, the conversations are ongoing, and many CIOs they are very receptive to the whole concept and to the idea. And one of the other challenges that we need to address jointly with these enterprises is that of systems integration, because companies like banks, for example, or even if you look at Reliance Industries Limited as an enterprise. So we operate one of the largest refineries in the world at Jamnagar, and we have our own IT systems over there. And how do we make sure that the 5G private network at the edge, it seamlessly integrates with the existing IT systems, so that the CIOs do not get scared that their entire IT investment, like what Caroline mentioned, would go for a toss and they will need to reinvest when they move or when they embrace 5G. So CIOs are willing to talk, and these are some of the discussion points that frequently come up.
Caroline, same point to you. Are the discussions changing now? Are conversations shifting more and more towards how to change businesses to be able to adopt the 5G private network that will be on anvil soon?
Yeah. So you talked about what's happening in India. Recently, we actually did a Intel commissioner survey of the CIOs, the top 1,000 CIOs inside the United States. The results are actually very similar, ironically. Number one thing is that a lot of CIOs want 5G. So if they refuge about they want to spend 5 to 10% of the IT budgets on networking. Very encouraging, right? And also because they're sitting at this cusp of 5G is coming, and even though their current use cases may not require 5G, no one wants to go for a 4G network. They want to start with a 5G because to give them the evergreen going forward, right? No one wants to go for an older technology. So the overwhelming response that they want a 5G network. So we are seeing the movement. We are seeing the conversation. At least here in the US, and we also see the same trend in Europe, very similar to I used describing, is actually industrial side. A lot of the industrial players are very intrigued. We actually have a couple of test beds going on that they want to test out how can 5G, especially URLC side, can provide them a slice of the network for them to leverage their inside their factory floors. Very encouraging. I think retail is another one that we're seeing. Healthcare initially we thought was going to be much later, but turns out to be much earlier, primarily because of the difficulties we're facing in a society. The fourth one we weren't expecting, but we're seeing that right now is education. Distant learning and how do we leveraging the 5G, not just as a connectivity, but also provide a much richer experience to the students. Because a lot of the education today in the US is hybrid. Some of it is in person, a lot of it is happening remote. So we definitely see a unexpected surge in the demand for 5G private networks.
Okay, so in that case, let's go a step forward then. How or what role will blockchain play in 5G private networks and sort of changing the game there? Carrying first to you.
So, on the outset, it looks like blockchain and 5G are two different things, but
Yeah.
what we have seen is that 5G really started accelerating blockchain. So we've
Hmm.
done a actually late earlier this year, we actually had a blockchain experiment, a POC with one of the major manufacturer in the United States, actually in the defense industry side. So blockchain to them, especially a private blockchain, so or the permission-based blockchain, has a role within the 5G private network to protect transaction. They were tracking the supply chain. Think about all of the issues that people are concerned of. This is a particularly the defense industry. So private blockchain place restrictions on who's allowed to participate in the network and what kind of transaction. Because of the control, due to the control of the enterprise and the network, and we are seeing that the 5G, the low latency piece, and the high capacity piece really allow the blockchain to take hold. So we had a very successful pilot. They were connecting. I remember there was a particular factory. They were connecting multiple thousands of nodes. These are little small nodes inside the factory floors. Connect them together as a private blockchain. Uh, Otherwise, they will have to limit it to 10 and hundreds. So 5G really enabled that. We initially you think that two different applications, one becomes an enabler of the other. So yes, so net we do believe that 5G enable especially a private blockchain adoption.
Hmm. Do you agree with that point, Ayush? And what else, according to you, will blockchain bring to the table for 5G private networks?
Right. So, see, there are three big use cases. The biggest use case is identity management at the edge, because enterprises want to be in control of the private network infrastructure and who has access to it. The other part, like I mentioned before, is data sovereignty, especially in the wake of the GDPR standards, and awareness in India is also very high. There are discussions going on in the government as well on how to ensure data privacy. So blockchain definitely helps in that regard. And the third use case is for those enterprises which have a large supply chain and who have assets which are moving around the country using that supply chain. So, how to digitize and monetize those assets through a blockchain based network. So, these are the three big use cases. There is, of course, an opportunity of using both 5G and blockchain technology for the benefit of the Indian agricultural sector, where you have, poor farmers and you have small business owners who are left out of the digital economy completely. So how to monetize the supply chain of agricultural produce and to make sure that a fair price is always ensured through smart contracts, that is something which can be a very big thing for the Indian economy, because agriculture is a large part of that.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Ayush, then just taking from that issue, help us understand how will blockchain then combine with the impact of 5G change or help the telecom industry? And in that same light, what are the kind of challenges that the sector could face?
Right. So, if you look at the urban sector of India, like smart cities, for example, so blockchain definitely has a very large role to play in that regard, because as MMTC, as it is called in technical jargon, massive machine type communication, more normally known as IoT in our general conversations. Once that starts getting deployed over a 5G network, then blockchain can be used for providing a greener and a cleaner society, because energy credits can be given to people who are using who are energy efficient and whose carbon rating is low. So there are some use cases in the smart cities space. And as far as the challenges are concerned, again, any new technology faces the biggest challenge of initial adoption. There are always people who are early adopters and who are advocates of a technology. In this case, in blockchain, mostly this technology is being adopted by the developer community. But if we create compelling distributed apps, as they are called, on top of blockchain, then the consumers can also, take advantage of that. So early adoption would be critical once the use cases on smart cities start rolling out to the consumer. The other challenge would be the infrastructure, because the smart cities projects, they are mostly through a special purpose vehicle created by the government of India. So how and where the blockchain infrastructure will be hosted from a data perspective, those conversations need to happen. Whether private players will be allowed to supply the blockchain infrastructure, set it up for them, or will there be an alternate strategy which will be coming out through the state governments and the central government? So that remains to be seen.
Okay, so in that case, Caroline, it's very clear that there are challenges, but in what will say the Jio and Intel partnership, for instance, how will that galvanize or change the way 5G private networks and blockchain are adopted by not just enterprises but even individuals, for that matter?
I think it's like Ayusha alluding to. It's going back to speeds and feeds and low latency. The other thing we got to think about is security, right? We especially if you go beyond enterprises to a wider adoption, we have to look at how do we secure all of the transactions. So we looked at Intel has multiple assets of blockchain that we together with Jio that we're working on. Security technologies like crypto accelerators, container security, trusted compute technologies. These are what we talk about at the silicon level. So this is probably the most secure technology you could have. Within Intel, we call them SGX or secure enclave. And function accelerators like those developed for machine learning and combined with our own investment into the standard efforts like trusted compute specs. So these are the foundational technologies which drive a broader acceptance and adoption of a multi-party trusted framework that Ayush was alluding to. When you talk about wide adoption, it's no longer one to another. It's a multi-party effort that we need to make sure that the users that has the assurance that's secure and it's a fast, it's a low latency type of transactions.
Okay, so Ayush, to your mind, what do Jio and Intel together bring to the table, and how will they sort of fast track the adoption of 5G and blockchain?
See, the partnership between Jio and Intel is a very unique one, because we have already been partners in the 4G network before this. But in case of 5G, the situation has changed further, because Jio has their own technology. So we are not dependent on multiple parties to provide us with the technological components. And having said that, we have also made our own blockchain platform. So we are not using any open source alternatives. So from a technological standpoint, if you combine Jio and Intel, where Intel also brings to the table significant technological capabilities, then these two partners together are self-sufficient in implementing this technology and implementing it at Jio scale. Because we usually do not go out for POCs at Jio. We always want to deliver something which can scale and which can reach hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in the country. So I'm very hopeful and positive that in the coming quarters and in the coming year, we will see some very significant progress.
All right. So Ayush, Caroline, I'll ask you to hold your thoughts. We have a couple of audience questions coming in. So let's take a couple of the key questions that have come in, and some of them very similar. So the first one to you, Ayush. One audience is asking that installing private 5G networks will of course cost enterprises a lot more if they have more than one location. Why then should companies offer private 5G networks instead of a public 5G option?
Right. So see, when it comes to estimation of cost, that really depends upon the business context of that particular enterprise. Because if the OPEX of that enterprise is going down, or if their revenues are increasing because of operational efficiencies, then a lot of it would offset any investment that they make in this particular technology. So whether it is one location or whether there are multiple locations, that again depends on which business they are in. If they are into the retail and FMCG segment, where they have hundreds and thousands, thousands of stores in the country, then it makes sense for them to be having a fully connected and automated storefront, as well as a fully connected and automated supply chain, so that they're always ahead of the curve in delivering value to their customers. So this question has to be put into context in the business context of that enterprise.
Okay, Caroline, I'll take the second question with you. We have a question coming in on how enterprises, and this is something that pretty much every enterprise out there, especially SMEs, would have. How can enterprises ensure security with a private 5G network, and what are the hurdles in that process?
So to me, security needs to be implemented in layers. It's like the onions. You have multiple layers of defense that needs to play. We always advocate, we started with zero trust, right? Using zero trust, you have to have secure boot. Again, that's a technology rooted in our silicon, and also the ensuring the root of trust is actually built into the complete systems. Including the application. These are all foundational stuff. So 5G private networks have to have the right security placement, even for data in flight, even for data during transaction. So ultimately, 5G with blockchain need to offer lower latency, secure tracking of data. I think I used to talk about that quite a bit. And then the 5G provides that lowers secure latency. That's another one. Why Jio and Intel makes it such a unique pair? We provide some of the silicon technology and some the foundational software. And when it goes to Jio, because you have such a large R&D resources, and you build your own your infrastructure, and you also consume it. So you are extremely self-contained ecosystem. It's the best way for us to take this innovations like 5G and blockchain to practice.
Ayush, let me get your view also on this. Caroline raised a very interesting analogy that talking about security is like peeling an onion. So, when you look into this, when companies like Jio and Intel have to look into the security aspect, what is the sort of checklist, or what are the points that you have to keep in mind, and how do you ensure that 5G private networks are secure for enterprises, especially with respect to data protection?
Yes. So like what Caroline was mentioning, I'll take the same example of an onion, right? So onion has several layers, right? So when we talk about security, it has several parameters of security. So the outer parameter is, of course, physical security, that wherever my private 5G network is installed, I should, not have any unauthorized access to my equipment or my infrastructure. Then comes the next layer, which is network security, that provided that there is no physical access, my network should be secure at the IP layer, so that there is no unauthorized access or hacking or something similar into my infrastructure. Now, the third layer of security are the 5G applications themselves, because 5G applications are cloud native. They are containerized, like what Caroline mentioned in one of her comments. So when it comes to cloud native applications, the blueprint of security changes somewhat, and the traditional chief security officers or information security officers are still coming to terms with the cloud native security. So that is an evolving area that needs to be focused upon. And then at the higher layer of the stack comes identity access management, that okay, there is no unauthorized access, but people who have access to the system, they have proper checks and balances in place, so that they do not tamper with, or they do not destabilize the network, or there is no data loss. So there are multiple layers of security, and some of the areas are more developed from a standards perspective and from a practice perspective, while some other areas are still evolving.
Okay, Caroline, just to simplify this for our viewers, help us then just differentiate in very simple layman terms, which companies or which services or which industries would benefit the most out of 5G private networks versus the public cloud platform?
I don't know if this the answers is 100% applicable, but what we've seen so far is the industrial. The industrial seems to be the first one that jump out. We are already seeing, I mentioned some test bed. Actually, we're actually seeing some early adoption of manufacturing floor taking this, because they can actually calculate the ROI, right? It improves their efficiency. There's definitely ROI, improves the security and safety. There's a lot of times safety actually comes into play, especially around the situation we're facing right now. Surprisingly, we're actually seeing retail actually adopting this a payment system, no contact payment. That one I mentioned. Healthcare, we didn't expect that to happen so soon. It actually has happened, but so far I would say if I were going to have my vote, it's industrial seems to be the first one that really jumped out.
Would you agree to that point, Ayush? And help us also then break up that what are the possible advantages of a public cloud platform as well versus a private one, and what do enterprises need to keep in mind when they're actually doing the comparison of the two?
See, when it comes to public cloud-based 5G deployment, that is more apt for the IT sector, who do not want to own any infrastructure, who are more content with the cloud-based offering. But when it comes to industries, like refineries or robotics and those kind of industries, and healthcare in particular, they want complete control over the infrastructure and the data. So that is where private 5G, satisfies their requirements. So these are two different variants which are targeting two different sectors.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Caroline, since we were talking about the issue of security, there are some sectors that are more sensitive than others. Since we're talking about the onions and the layers being peeled off, what specifically do people need to keep in mind in sensitive areas such as defense, such as international relations, where you have actually sensitive, international information that needs to be protected?
What Ayush described earlier, I could not have said it better. He actually did a very specific definition of different layers to do this. Inside United States, there is actually a governmental agency called NIST, which starting defining sort of security protocols. So we actually been involved heavily with them. We do believe the ultimate defense of security roots in the silicon itself. So that's why Intel takes great pain to ensure the secure enclave is built into every one of our silicon CPUs and in our memories. That to me, that's the ultimate defense system that I usually just describing layers and layers. Very well done, identity management and everything. So that's why we are really proud to partner with Jio. We want to take that into practice, into develop a secure 5G enclave blueprint with the Jio platforms.
Okay, let's start talking about what more is needed from the blockchain perspective as well. Ayush, I know we touched upon this a bit, but I want to really delve into where companies stand when it comes to the blockchain blueprint currently, and what all needs to change there then.
Okay, so see, if we talk about blockchain in the context of 5G, then there have been certain proofs of concepts around the world. But the biggest use case that has stood out has been identity and access management and data security. These are the two major use cases that have stood out in the context of 5G. Of course, there have been other use cases as well, which have been in close collaboration with the IoT technology. But what needs to be done is to move beyond the POCs now, and perhaps a certain level of standardization may also be required, because otherwise, what is going to happen that some POCs, will end, they will not scale up, and in order to ensure that the adoption is far and wide, some standardization efforts are required. Just like cellular networks and all these technologies that we talk about, they are well standardized and defined. And then ISVs are then forced to follow these standards. They are forced to interoperate with each other. So some interoperability standards perhaps need to be developed, and that is a big gap when we talk about blockchain. That there are no standards. IEEE has, taken up this initiative of defining some standards,
Yeah.
but every organization comes up with their own standards. So then we are back to square one.
Caroline, do you want to chip in on this point that there aren't any clear standards, and of course that does pose its own set of challenges?
Yeah, I totally agree. Because when you talk about doing wireless, we thrive on standards, interoperability, 3GPP. I do believe that us as like Jio definitely has a loud voice in this. So we do need it to a level standard to allow scaling. You can do a very successful POC, but it's not widely adopted, and the ecosystem really don't benefit from it. So having that the NIST in the United States does some of it, and I'm really hoping that the industry as a whole, like with Jio is a very prominent leader in this. We need to should start adopting a common blockchain, protocol that we can all adhere to.
Okay. In the earlier session, we were talking about how soon will 5G be in India. So I'm going to get both your views on that very quickly before we take closing comments. Ayush, to you, your peers in Jio indicated that 5G is going to be around the corner sooner than expected, and Jio is taking a lead in that. Your view on that?
See, in India, usually any new generational technology starts off with these spectrum auctions, and that is the starting point, and not just the spectrum auctions, but the right amount of spectrum. So globally, if you talk about the mid-band spectrum, which is 3.5 gigahertz, globally 100 megahertz of spectrum has been allotted to carriers. In India, discussions are still ongoing, whether to auction 50, whether to auction 100, and when to auction it. So the moment spectrum auctions take place and the spectrum is allocated formally to the carriers who win the auction, I believe that is when the deployment is going to happen in a big way. But probably 3 quarters from now, that is an educated guess. But let's see what happens.
Caroline, do you agree with that? 3 quarters from now, and do you believe that India will be able to? The fact of the matter is that we are behind some of our global peers. So, do you believe that India will be able to fast track being able to close that gap?
With Jio as a leader in this, 100% agree. We will be, when you said that you're ready, we'll be there with you.
Okay, well said. So the partnership between Intel and Jio is of course going to play a very critical role in India being able to adopt and transform with 5G. Closing comments then, first to you, Carolina. What then are the points that companies, that our viewers need to keep in mind as they adopt blockchain and 5G private networks? And to your mind, what really are going to be the game-changing points within these areas?
To me, for 5G to be truly successful, we need to drive the adoption into the verticals and enterprises. And based on what we have seen so far, based on the pilots and POCs and all the discussion we have seen in other in markets, US and Europe, we definitely seen a very good sign that 5G will benefit the enterprises and verticals. Blockchain can happen securely with 5G. What we wanted to do is become the enablers become the technology trusted partners of the ecosystem, especially with Jio, under the Jio leadership. We definitely hope to do this in the India market as well.
Okay, same question to you, Ayush. Then, what to you stands out in this relationship, and how do you really believe that the entire ecosystem is going to benefit from Intel and Jio? And what are the points that the audience needs to really keep in mind at this point before they think about adopting to these areas?
See, it is our commitment at Jio that we will deploy one of the largest 5G networks in the world in India, and we will make sure that it reaches, all sections of society as far as the consumer segment is concerned, and also all businesses, whether they are startups, whether they are SMBs, whether they are large established enterprises. Because in India there is a large appetite of digitization which is still left unfulfilled. Part of it got fulfilled with the 4G revolution, but we are not satisfied, so we will take it forward with the 5G revolution.
All right, revolution indeed. Ayush, Caroline, thank you so much for taking the time out and talking about some very critical, very difficult to understand areas, but you simplified it well enough for us and everyone. Thank you so much, Ayush and Caroline, once again for joining in this exclusive webinar. And thank you to our audience for staying with us patiently and listening to all the critical points. Thanks for watching.